Welcome to The Week Ahead, a podcast by SBM Intelligence. I'm your host, Veronica Pana Igube. Every Friday, we explore stories that are shaping Africa. The past president of Nigeria, Muhammadu Buhari, has died at the age of 82 after a long illness. He was buried on Tuesday, 15 July, in his hometown in Nigeria, following the return of his body from the UK. We reflect on Buhari's leadership and his legacy. The US is deporting migrants, including Nigerians, and wants African countries to take people from other countries. Some countries, including Nigeria, have pushed back as a result of the US having placed visa restrictions on countries that did not cooperate with it. Both Nigeria and Ghana now face visa limits, only single entry visas for 3 months. How should African countries respond to the US pressure while protecting their people and policies? Meanwhile, five African leaders recently met with Donald Trump at the White House lunch. Trump expressed interest in visiting Africa and complimented Liberia's president in good English. Could it lead to a real investment and strong partnership between the US and Africa? Joining us today for further insights is Samuel Atiku, policy analyst. Welcome, Samuel, to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me on on the podcast. Yes.
It's always a pleasure having you. It's such a sad, I mean, it's such a sad story to hear about the passing of the past president in Nigeria. And today we would like to talk about some of his leadership and legacy as well. What do you think were the most defining moments of Buhari's presidency, and how did they shape Nigeria's democratic journey and civic space?
Yes, I think we'll just need to start by sending our sincere condolences to his family that is left behind, and then his relative that is left behind. Yes, it's always a painful episode when one loses loved ones. It's always very painful. Uh, but, 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 but we have to objectively look at who he is, and then, of course, the economy and then the socio-economic situation that he left Nigeria with. If you look at his tenure as an elected president, 2015 to 2023, of course, we know that there were bold, I'll call it their bold rhetorics. We had heavy public spending. We have authoritarian tactics that was deployed. People were killed. We had widespread economic hardship. If you recall, during the elections, to get cash was very difficult for people. And then it felt that those policies that were, I'll call it anti-people, anti-economy, or anti-economy, anti-people, anti-logic itself, were actually the best cause for the country as at that time. And then one wonders how the president then was processing information. And we did complain about some bits of that. I think back to the question that you raised, what are these enduring legacy? I think the first thing we need to talk about is this anti-corruption crusade. When people hear Buhari, the first thing that comes to people's mind is his anti-corruption crusade. If you recall, he rise to become president based on his persona as a fighter of corruption. But when he got into government, the first thing that you take a look at, it took a dive at, is that Nigeria collected almost 91.7 trillion naira uh, as revenue, federally collected revenue. Of course, some of them were shared across states. If you look closely at that revenue bit itself, there were a lot of rhetorics around what they were doing. Really, in real sense, there was no meaningful systemic reform that happened. Of course, you hear about TSA, but people circumvent it. You come about this. All those ones were even carried over reform. He had absolutely nothing in terms of policy design, in terms of policy framework to reform the ways in which revenues are collected. Remember, he rode on that persona of a warrior of, how will I call it? He was a warrior. He was a fighter of corruption. And when he got into government, what we're operating, we just continue business as usual. In fact, some of his people started making money, dollars were changed. People were just doing anyhow. Corruption actually shot through the roof. So nothing really was there in terms of that. That's on the revenue side itself, the revenue collection, but the talks were still deployed to collect revenue in the country. Um, how will I call it? If you look at the Federal Inland Revenue Service, they were not being audited, even when the Auditor General was screaming, we need to audit these agencies. Ignored all those things and nothing happened. In fact, they turned it into a political gymnastics and then nothing really happened. The second thing, people must know that within that 8 years' time, the Buhari government spent, I'm not talking about budgeted, I'm saying spent 91.98 trillion naira. That's how much he spent within his 8 year tenure. And if you're doubting me, you go on the website of the CBN, go into their statistical bulletin, and look at the total amount 2015 to 2023, how much was spent, and then you could do the calculation yourself. 91.98 trillion was spent in this country. Was spent by the president. Federal government spending. I'm not talking about state government spending. The big question is this: did you see any improvement in the lives of people? We could look at the number per generation. Did it grow? Nothing. We're stuck at about 3,900 in terms of the total number of power we are generating. Nothing significantly happened. Doctor to patient ratio went down, right, from 4,000 to one person to about 5,000 to one person. Out of school students got stopped at around 10.5. No policy designed to put people in school. The share, if you look at our education outcome, they declined, and it's removed because very little money was actually voted for education. About it came down from about 9.7%, 7.1%. Unemployment rate went through the roof. When you get into government, the unemployment rate was 10.4%. It went to about 33% when it was leaving. I mean, as of 2021, that was the last time they took the data. And if you even put the employment data in context, it single-handedly destroyed almost 35 million full-time jobs in the country. 35 million full-time jobs. For context, it took the United States roughly about, I think about 50 years to create 35 million full-time jobs. The president destroyed it under 8 years. And so, essentially, in terms of his anti-corruption rhetoric itself, we could call it like it was just pure rhetoric without systemic reform, and it led to nothing. That's the first thing we need to think about. The second thing that was there was national insecurity and the failure of the military first strategy that he brought on board. Remember, a lot of people were dying. Terrorism was all over the whole place. You have separatist crisis that was there. There was banditry. There was massive kidnapping. I mean, if you talk to people around you, most likely come in contact with somebody that has been kidnapped for ransom. And then there were a lot of people were being, even in Abuja, the center of government, young people were being cutted down, their kidneys stolen, and then all those things were happening, but there were no action. In fact, when people protested that the police needs to be reformed, rather than adhere to the voice of reason, he sent his military to actually kill people, cut away their bodies, lie about it, send in someone, a old man that should know better, to continue to lie and gaslight people as if nothing happened. That is his legacy that people should always remember. It's an unforgivable, I'll call it, sin against the people of Nigeria, and no way to sugarcoat it. It's a, don't let me use my word. I mean, we're on a podcast, so let me be a little bit lighter here. But it's actually a very painful episode. Just like I mentioned, we also had ballooning debts in the country. His deficit officially was about 27.5 trillion. If you look at the total debt stock of Nigeria, as at the time he was leaving government, he accounted for about 85% of Nigeria's public debt during that same period. 85% of Nigeria's public debt. He was borrowing money arbitrarily. And what was this money spent on? You can't see the outcome. It was not going into the health of the people. It was not going into education to improve educational outcomes. It was not being spent on infrastructure. I know people will talk about some railway. But look at it, 91 trillion was spent. Remember, under the federal government, but that doesn't tell you the exact story. There were other spending that was happening in silos that people don't know. So when you put the weight of money spent, now just imagine you getting 91 trillion and dividing it by citizen, by the total number of population of people. You know what I'm talking about. The impact should be significant, but it has not, nothing happened. And then at the end of it, it left 85%. Our debt profile went up to the roof. And the 85% of debt that the new government inherited today was as a result of its actions. Meaning that the generations yet unborn, people that are 1 year old, 2 year old, we have to pay for this debt without any meaningful, I'll call it socioeconomic improvement in the country. That's number four. Shrinking public space and democracy backslide. I mean, you cannot remember the NSAS crackdown. The Lekki toll gate shooting, the genocide. I'll call it genocide if I can use the word clearly. That's been happening in the Middle Belt region of the country. The way he went into and created IPOB within the southeastern part of the country, because of his actions, he actually turned that place into a killing field. Within the Middle Belt region of Nigeria, rather than acting as a statesman, as a president, addressing issues, he took side with terrorists hiding as herdsmen. And they were killing children, and he did not care. He even went as far as defending those herdsmen, or what you call terrorists hiding as herdsmen, in the front of the President of the United States. That is his legacy. And then he took that straightforward when people started complaining about his action, and he had a Twitter ban. He started clamping down on journalists, on activists, and then critics. They were harassed, whether they were harassed through social media, banters, and all those kind of things. I know a lot of people were harassed. And the painful fact is that people that should know better, people that were at the forefront, right, of pushing for expanding rather than shrinking civil space, were used against the people of Nigeria. That is his legacy. People should remember that. Yes, electorally, I mean, we can talk about his electoral reform. He finally signed the Electoral Act of 2022. Yeah, we call it a rare institutional success because electronic transmission of results actually will, one way or the other, enhance our electoral credibility. But we knew his actions, especially during the elections itself, how they collude with INEC to truncate what we all celebrated as an institutional success. That is again his legacy. Whether people look at it or not, there were glimmers of hope during that period, but at the end of the day, when it comes to practice, again, the security apparatus of Nigeria aligned with him, and then they will end up actually destroying, I'll call it, the foundation upon which democracy is built in the country. I can go on and begin to say this, but I will just end by saying that um, he did spend massively without any measurable improvement in the condition of the people. He undermined civil freedom while taunting democratic credentials. He claimed to be a reformed Democrat, but he actually did exactly the opposite. He borrowed recklessly, leaving a generationally debt burden that everybody is still paying today. He strained our institution. He made our economy more vulnerable. He reduced Nigeria into a laughing stock in the international community. And then it led to mass wave of Nigerians. In fact, many Nigerians had to leave the country because of his utterances and actions. And that is his legacy. That is what people should remember about the president. Of course, he cracks one joke here or there. And then the people that walk close to him, that were able to cut away some bags or maybe laugh at his joke, feel that he has done well to Nigeria. But if you look at the pulses, if you look at the pulse and you take the pulse of the over 200 million people in Nigeria, I'm sure the consensus is that he failed miserably as number one as a president and number two as an elder statesman, despite the fact that Nigeria gave him everything he has. I think that will be his legacy, to say the least.
I know you spoke really deeply about his legacy, but we've also seen in times past where he himself has asked Nigerians for forgiveness, and most recently, his wife asking Nigerians to forgive her husband. And I mean, she stated that this was a request from her husband as well to plead to Nigerians for their forgiveness. What lessons do you think that young leaders and leaders that we have presently can take away from this, as well as from what he has done, and what lessons can they learn to improve their own governance and leadership?
Yeah. Yeah, I think if we reflect, I think the first thing we can think I would think about is like number one, symbolism is not a substitute for systemic reform. Buhari's anti-corruption to sound like Americans, right? Anti-corruption persona won him election. Absolutely. We fail to translate those personal integrity, the shade of those integrity into sustainable institutional change. That's important. Corruption continue to persist in Nigeria. State capture is even deepened under its wash. So for young leaders, you must go beyond image building. It's not about paying that social media person to be painting your image. You need to think of real change, change that is enshrined in a transparent system that empowers institution over your persons, and you create functional systems that can change and correct things for people. That should be number one that you push up. The second thing is that centralizing leadership again is showing to everybody is an ineffective and very risky. Buhari himself was very slow when it comes to decision making. If you remember, of course, we used to call him Baba Go Slow, and he laughed about it. His decision making were excessively centralized. He did not even believe in people that he have employed to help him carry out the function of government. He relied overly on just very narrow circle of advisors, the people that he has worked with. You can see even the ambassador to the United States, it reflects that. He was not putting the people before, he was not putting people at the heart of his policy design. I would say, number one, for young leaders, you must remember that you need competent teams, you need to delegate authority, and you have to allow people actually to correct you as a leader. In fact, the hallmark, the beauty of leadership is ability for you to take corrections and adapt with that. So for upcoming leaders and then for young African leaders, I would say that's very important. Centralization, this agility, this centralization does not lead to any. In fact, I've been looking at some academic paper around decentralization. Decentralization is one way or the other. Agility and then inclusion are key, very, very key to improved outcomes. So we need to look at that. The third one is security cannot be won by force alone. I've always said that you cannot bamboozle your way, use military, kick people in the head, and expect them to fall in line. It never works. And that's what we see. How we have escalated issues in the southeast, in the middle belt, the crisis that we had in the northeastern region has spread to the southwestern region, in the southeastern region, everywhere you go now, there's insecurity. Despite the fact that he was spending massively in the military, he was hell bent on using military force to achieve what he wants to do. He did not secure anything. Peace building, dialogue, justice, community engagement. I'll call it a robust public participatory systems are critical. They are better than guns, right? Security must be holistic. It has to be inclusive. You cannot secure everybody. That's important for us to think about as young leaders. I will say we need, again, I can go on and on, the concept of monetary recklessness, printing money arbitrarily to actually fool your guards should be, in fact, even when the law actually frowned against it, he pushed away the law and pushed ahead. Of course, he had gone ahead to break walls of Supreme Court justice. He removed the Supreme Court justice in this country. In Nigeria, nothing happened, right? So it took it further to begin to directly disobey laws that we carefully designed to protect our people, to protect our savings, our wages. He went ahead and started printing money through ways and means, borrowing arbitrarily. It triggered inflation. It reduced real value of wage and savings for people. For young leaders, fiscal prudence, right? Not popularism itself, must be the guide of your public spending. Economic shortcuts will always hurt the poor. Let's always remember that. Five, democracy. What he did during NSAS massacre. And then the media clampdown that followed, the Twitter ban that follows. Buhari government showed a disregard and disdain for people that actually oppose him. I remember sending Tolu Ogulesi to abuse people, sending people to do one or two. Femi Adesina, I mean, he's still there, right? Talking about abusing expert, medical expert in the country, talking as if he has not gone to school, right? We need to ensure that future leader, you must protect, not suppress civil society. You must ensure that there's civic engagement. You must ensure that there's press freedom. It's not negotiable in every functional democracy. That should be the fulcrum. That should be at the heart of how you actually engage your people. Electoral reform is something we must not throw away. Even when it's on law, the principles around it must be there too. We need structural reforms, right? But notwithstanding, even if we have it on paper and the president is submounting and actually sidestepping it, of course, nobody will take you there. Nobody will take you serious. So for young leaders, you must prioritize those laws and institutions that you build so that they can outlive you. And that will be your living legacy. Unfortunately for the president, the late president, he did not put all those things in practice. I will say, I'd end by saying for young Africans, especially for leaders, read Buhari's textbook, right? And read about the danger of governing on symbolism, militarism, rigidity. Read it. That is his textbook. His life is the textbook of if you can do exactly the opposite of what Buhari did, I'm sure Nigeria will be a better place. Good intentions are always very meaningless if you cannot deliver. And leadership must be judged not by what they promise, but by what they build and protect. Buhari saw his election as the height of his success, not what he did for the people. You must see the people and what you do for the people itself at the heart of your success, not winning elections. If we can put that in place, I'm sure a whole lot of things will improve.
I mean, hope these are really great lessons that I think that young leaders and leaders of now can take, can learn from. Let's move on to our second story. So we've seen the US try to start deporting um, citizens or of other nations to African countries, and we've seen a pushback from African countries, and the US has responded in restricting visa access and visa like kind of bans to reducing it to like 3 months for some African nations, including Nigeria. How do you think that African countries should respond to this US immigration pressure without necessarily compromising their dignity as well as safety of their citizens abroad? And what does this current US visa restriction policy reveal about the global inequality? And is there a need for Africa to redefine its foreign policy priorities?
I think I will start with, I will always like to start with the last question. It's painful that we've been boxed into a very tight corner by the President of the United States. And I will say something very, very funny. It sounds weird, but it sounds, again, very, very instructive. When the president, when President Trump got elected, the first thing I worried about was number one, he's going to withdraw support for Africans because he was going to do that anyway in his first tenure before COVID happened. It is going to shut away some of the support that the US gives to Africa. And he did that. He has done that. USAID had been taken out, and then you have these risk meters around ABCD. The second thing also is that he's going to try to put and mount pressure on small African countries to align with him, given the fact that if you go as one, as a united front, it's going to be challenging for him to actually push through some of his policies. And some of his policies sometimes are not necessarily grounded. Remember, at some point in time, he was selling to the late president that he wanted American agricultural product to flood Nigeria, which will typically kill an additional 25 million jobs. If you remember, in Nigeria today, almost 25 million people rely on agriculture for sustenance, for jobs and livelihood. So my take here is simple. Africa must demand a very strategic, equitable, and development-driven partnership. No symbolic gesture, no photo ops. You don't have to go to the White House, sit with the president and take picture, just like the South Africa president tried to do. At the end, it doesn't change anything. And how do you get there? The first thing we need to do is we need to present ourselves as one continent, powerful. We need to put our trade, we need to shift from raw exports to value driven. I know there's is it the AGOA policies and all those things that have been put in place. Those things will be thrown away. Remember, even despite the fact that Nigeria import more from the US, the US is even placing more tariff on us. And how do you respond? You can't do anything because if you respond, you're on your own. So we need to actually come together as one local, we should see Africa as one local manufacturing and industrialization center and present ourselves to the world like that. It's going to be difficult to get there, but that will be the first thing. So I'm expecting African leaders to begin to meet, integrate the economy together. I like the fact that Kenya taking the lead in terms of dropping visa restrictions on all. You don't have to apply for visa across Africa to move to Kenya. We should do that. We should integrate ourselves more as one continent and begin to present ourselves through that lens. It's a difficult call, but it's something we need to do. The second thing is simple. We need to get support for African tech ops, our digital infrastructure, our data sovereignty. Now, if you look at China, which is the alternative that we have, one way or the other, they've been doing that. If you look closely at the infrastructure use, in fact, if you land in every African country, if you see infrastructure, it's most likely built by China. So we need to begin to present that these are the critical infrastructure, and these are potential places we want the United States to help intervene. That's the second thing. I don't want to dive deeper because of time. Youth development is also critical. No matter what you see or what you do, we need to actually train more people in the country, in the continent itself. Our doctors, we need to train our frontline workers. We need to train ourselves, given the fact that the world is evolving very fast. Yes. How do we have those kind of exchange programs? Things that will not elevate the status or take pictures as it go, but rather things that will promote our young people so that they can scale across the world. We need to push for that. And we need to make sure we are presenting ourselves as a unified front. Now, to the big question, what can we do as African? The truth is that we are disadvantaged. We have the population. If you look at the population of Africa as one, it's also very comparable to the population of China. It's comparable to the population of India. But the question is that why does the US take China extremely very serious? Because they're one, right? And why do they take India serious? Because they see them as one with their population. We also have the population. In fact, we have rare earth material. We have virtually all resources in Africa, but we are fragmented. And those fragmentation are by design. It was designed, I mean, we could talk about neocolonialism and how Africa was designed and read those books. But one way or the other, we need to fuse ourselves together as one and then begin to present ourselves as one. That's the first standing point. Now, questions like deporting people into Africa. The question is that what can Africa do? For instance, if you start bringing in gang members, right? Remember, the failure in Libya had created some of the crises we are seeing in Nigeria. So you now bring out gang members, right? From Venezuela, from the US, you bring them with their guns and you dump them on small African countries that are just escaping civil war, that are struggling, famine, and you put them into the system. It's just a matter of time before the jail system crack open. And then they come in and they build a colony here for themselves and begin to perpetrate crime. So for big countries like Nigeria, big countries like South Africa, big countries like Ghana, I would say Ghana is a big country like the Congo, those big countries, even in North Africa, Egypt, and we need to come together as one and actually reboot this and stop them from doing that. Um, we need to also enroll support. I'll call it our emerging partners, China, Russia, that can actually talk to the US and force them into action. I think that's the way we can do. That's what we can do for now, as we continue to build a more united front in Africa. Now, for the visa issues and all those other issues that you asked about, it's painful that it's happened. Um, the way Nigeria's visa works and the US visa work is completely, they are two different systems. But the president of the US is actually looking for reasons to punish Nigeria for refusing, um, for refusing to take, I'll call it gangs from, I'll call it gangs from Venezuela, gangs from, because they can't find anywhere to put them in. Because again, most countries, I'll call it most countries in South America, they have their strength itself have rejected this advance. So how do we punish them? Maybe if we put pressure on them, we get this done. And unfortunately, also, I don't think our foreign relations systems, the system we built, having after Buhari himself left government, and then these new people came into power, the new president came into power. I don't think that is robust enough to begin to shift things. So I will say there's little or limited thing we can do. We can only have dialogue with them, have diplomatic conversation with them around what we are doing. Maybe we have to give out some things to get some things from them. But I would say overall, Nigeria, we are supposed to be leading in Africa. Unfortunately, we fall significantly behind. But we have to take the voice forward. We have to bring together African leaders and then begin to exert pressure on other small countries not to actually go and kiss the ring of King Trump, and then begin to turn your country upside down. I think that would be my big takeaway for this. It's a very tough question to say, especially when you are vulnerable and you are supposed to be talking to the most powerful country in the world. It's unfortunate.
Thank you very much. I mean, it was good to learn your insights about what African leaders need to ask when they sit on these tables, technology infrastructure, empowerment for youth as well. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode. And to our listeners, this podcast is by SBM Intelligence. You can access our podcast by searching for SBM Intelligence anywhere you find podcasts. For deeper insights into our work, visit our website at sbmintel.com. Remember to connect with us on all our social media platforms. You can find us on X, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Blue Sky at SBM Intelligence. That's all for today. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.